and the judiciary are, interestingly enough, one of the Supreme Court of Appeal judges, Mohammed Nafsa, one of our erstwhile partner here, Justice Dunstan Mlambo, and of course, Advocate Tembeka Ngcukaitobi, a partner at Bowman's and previously a director of the LRC's Constitutional Litigation Unit. In other words, our paths have been crossing every now and then as this FEM and the LRC. However, our relationship with the LRC goes further back than that, back to its creation when we worked with the legal icons who helped establish the LRC, such as the late Chief Justice and his first Constitutional Court President, Justice Arthur Chaskasin, Justice Ngobo, Sandile Ngobo, and leading legal luminary advocate George Bizos, SC. Before I continue, could I please ask that we all stand up and observe a minute's silence for the victims of gender violence and xenophobic violence? Yes, just a split second. Thank you. Thanks. I'm going to quote directly from a speech our chairperson, Rob Lee, made to all the Bowman's family 2 weeks ago. I quote, "Gender and xenophobic violence are anathema to Bowman's as a firm and to all of us, the people of Bowman's. Our vision for this firm is based on a fundamental belief in non-racialism and multiculturalism, the embracing of new and different people, and leveraging mutual benefit from the energy generated out of our diversity. Bowman's is also built on a strong belief in the continent of Africa and what we as the people of Africa across our offices and countries can do better, the continent and ourselves. Gender violence, racism, and xenophobia strike at the very heart of what we want to achieve. Some of these heinous crimes are actively promoted by our political leaders who irresponsibly say what they want and do what they want without giving a second thought to the impact of their comments. In other respects, our national leaders create the space for this when they sit on their hands and do nothing or say things too little and too late." End of quote. It is our belief, therefore, that the work of the LRC is as vital today, perhaps even more vital, unfortunately, than when it was established in 1979, with the primary aim of using the law as an instrument of justice for South Africa's marginalized and under-resourced populations, the virtual victims of law. Some of you may not be as old as I am, but freedom of movement was not accessible to the likes of me. I had to carry my pass wherever I went, and I was a victim of the pass laws, among others. Today, the LRC continues to work with the vulnerable and those who face discrimination and even death as a result of ignorance, intolerance, and inequality. The legacy of the brutal system of apartheid oppression is currently manifesting itself in our beloved country in the most vicious and violent ways. We have an epidemic of femicide in South Africa with the brutal and barbaric murders of women. When women cannot enter our public spaces, like post offices, without the risk of being raped and murdered, we have to recognize that we are closing our society off to women's equal and free participation and enjoyment of our basic rights. All women, all who live in South Africa must be able to participate freely in our communities without fear of danger or death. This applies equally to our children, who are not safe from abuse and assault either. As chilling is the appalling xenophobia currently running rampant in our communities, resulting in death, destruction, and trauma. This shreds the fabric of our society because those who are being attacked are so-called foreigners, come from countries who sheltered our people fleeing the oppressive apartheid system a mere 30 years ago. Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it, as the old saying goes. The attacks against fellow Africans is a very personal matter for Bowmans. As a Pan-African firm, with our large footprint Africa-wide, we have offices and alliance partners in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Mozambique. These are the countries of our colleagues. These colleagues are part of the Bowmans family. We are committed to the prosperity and progress of Africa as a firm. Our lawyers work seamlessly across multiple African jurisdictions, including giving our junior lawyers the opportunity to work in our other African offices. It is imperative, therefore, that South Africa upholds the rule of law and respect for life of all our people, particularly the African victims of xenophobia, so that we can continue to engage with our fellow Africans at home and across the continent in a shared commitment to Africa's growth and prosperity. Only then can Africa realize her true potential. Only then can our people reap the benefits of an integrated continent that is commercially dynamic. We cannot and we must not be silent in the face of hateful conduct from our fellow citizens that violates the constitutional rights of everyone in South Africa. Our Constitution, an inspiring example of dignity, equality, and freedom for all, demands of us that we rise as a moral imperative to protect it and all who live in our country. Bowmans is proud to be part of the solution to addressing the legacy problems in our country. We staff domestic violence desks at courts in Gauteng and in the Western Cape. Our people assist refugees at centers to access justice, including ensuring that refugee children can participate in our educational system. Our pro bono work, which equated to 24 million rand worth of billable hours in the past year, has focused on strategic litigation, often in conjunction with the LRC and the Women's Legal Center. The Constitutional Court has inspired us whenever we have brought cases before it by ensuring that the rights enshrined in our Constitution are robustly interpreted and applied to ensure justice, equality, and dignity for all. As part of various legal teams, we have had some significant successes in the cases we have brought before the Constitutional Court. These include securing inheritance rights for black women, amending Muslim marriage laws, securing the tenancy rights of women whose husbands were employed on farms, and many more important judgments. We are immensely proud to be part of dedicated teams of lawyers who help shape and develop our jurisprudence in such a progressive manner. It is therefore so important to us to be able to host the LRC tonight, and particularly to have Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo to address us. It does so to honor Bram Fischer, an outstanding lawyer and a man of immense moral courage. Bram Fischer came from a very distinguished Afrikaner family in Bloemfontein, 6 generations deeply embedded in the legal and political echelons of Afrikaner South African society. Yet, he defied his conservative Afrikaner environment, thus turning his back on a certain future of commercial success, social status, and even potential political power. At Oxford, he joined the Communist Party and consequently felt the sharp heel of the apartheid regime on his return to South Africa. Despite the harassment, he stood up against the oppressive regime of injustice and made an immense contribution to the struggle for human rights at great personal cost. Contrast that to another individual, John Balthasar Foster, who was at the bar at the same time as Bram, and we can see the stark reality of personal choice. One used his power and privilege to entrench oppression, and the other, that is Bram, used his to challenge that same system, including defending Tata Mandela at the Rivonia treason trial, together with Chief Justice Charles Kassin, Advocate Bezos, Harry Schwartz, Joel Joffe, and others, all of whose efforts most certainly saved Madiba from being sentenced to death. The divergent roots of the two equally powerful Afrikaners came down to personal moral choice. And in so doing, Bram Fischer inspired many Afrikaners to reject their social environments and privileges, even their churches, like Oom Bears No Day, and contribute to the struggle for democracy for all. It behoves us all to follow his example as lawyers, as South Africans, as Africans, to use law as an instrument of justice and recognize the power that comes with our privilege, which in itself gives us an opportunity to honor Bram Fischer and so many others who helped liberate South Africa and continue to leave their legacy. Thank you, Deputy Chief Justice Zondo, for what we know and anticipate to be an inspiring speech. And thank you for joining us this evening. I look around here and I see people who are hungry and thirsty for your wise words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maduna, for your profound and sobering words. I'd now like to call upon Ms. Tandi Olaine, Chairperson of the LRT, to introduce our esteemed speaker.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I always find that it doesn't matter how much I believe I'm going to be tall, I always come behind taller people, and I've got to bring the mic down. Firstly, I must greet Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, and we thank you for being here tonight. I'll come back to introducing you. I must thank Mr. Penuel Maduna, as the Deputy Chair of Bowman's, for allowing us to use their facilities, and we don't have to pay for them. Thank you very much. Allow me to welcome everybody here. I'm not going to go through and mention a lot of people, but there are a few people I would like to acknowledge. I would like to acknowledge the trustees, and at the same time thank one of the trustees. Mr. Maduna forgot to add that Mr. Ezra Davis is one of our esteemed trustees, and we not only are getting this auditorium, but we learn a lot on him to ensure that we can operate as the LRC together with the other friends and people who are supporting the work of the LRC. And I believe we've got two more trustees, and we have made them to be on duty. You've already met Ms. Marjorie Ngwenya and Ms. Lumka Mlambo. When I joined the board of trustees, other than Janet Love, who was the national director at the time, I was the only woman trustee at the LRT. Now I'm proud to say that there are about 6 of us ladies at the LRT, so I feel very proud to be part of that team that is becoming more inclusive and diverse within this difficult sphere of social justice. I also would like to acknowledge specifically the presence of Ms. Ilza Wilson and her dear husband, Dr. Tim Wilson. Thank you for being here. We also received the apology from your sister Ruth. Ilsa and Ruth are the daughters of Bram Fischer. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of our staff. I'm not going to mention the names because I will just maybe mention 1, 2, 3, and then we will not know where else to go. But thank you for all your hard work through a very difficult year, not only for the country, for Africa, but as for the world, but for the LRC in particular. So we really appreciate you and acknowledge the work that you are doing. I've already mentioned one of the previous national directors, Janet Love, who's here. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Bongani Kumalo. Sorry, Mr. Bongani Majola. Mr. Bongani Majola, who was also a national director of the Legal Resources Center. So we have been well presented here. I would like to welcome the profession. I've seen a number of people from the profession in the room. I would like to also welcome our business partners. Corporate is properly represented here. The donors, I would like to thank them as well. I know there will be proper thank yous later on, but I would like to welcome you as our supporters, the people who've enabled us to do the work that the LRC is doing. I would like to add my voice. Before I do that, I would like to welcome the alumni. I see Trevor Bailey. And I thought, gosh, I'm forgetting an important stakeholder group here. The alumni of the LRC, some have already been mentioned. And then I would like to welcome all the ladies and gentlemen that I may have left outside of those stakeholder groups. I would like to add my voice in condemning the violence against women that has been taking place. And it's not just the last few weeks. It's been years. I believe that this has broken the camel's back, and hence the women have stood up, and those men who have stood up with them. We really have to stand behind them. As has been mentioned by Mr. Maduna, the LRC has been involved in this work for a long time, but we want to make sure that the citizenry stands up, supports this work. Without the citizenry, we in the courts will not win the war. So thank you, and I would like to say that this is a difficult time, and we are hoping that we can, as the President said earlier on today in Parliament, that we will see action rather than see platitudes saying that we are going to do this, we are going to do that. Thank you very much for that support. As one of the ladies have said somewhere else, that we've got to call this by its name. We shouldn't use euphemisms anymore. I will not also dwell on the issues of xenophobia, save to say that the work of the LRC on immigration matters stands for itself. It's shown in terms of the work that we are doing in education, that we are doing in relation to home affairs. I don't want to dwell on those issues, but we would like to make sure that the public in South Africa is aware of the work that we want to do and we are doing, and we hope that we can work with you as partners. Now turning to introducing Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. I thought, should I read his CV? And I said, now with Google, everybody can read it. Now that he is on our TVs all the time, he doesn't need any introduction. So I felt that I had to raise a few things that a number of people may not know or may have overlooked in terms of just engaging with the TV star that we see at the moment. Is that I'm proud to say that post-1994, we were able to say both what is called the bar and the sidebar was given equal status. So Judge Zondo came through the ranks of the sidebar, which means, to those who are not in the practice, as an attorney, and went via a court that is not only a court of strict justice, but a court of equity, which is the labor court. So in the old history or old background, we were colleagues, but I'm very proud to say that he also has a connection with the LRC. He was a fellow at the LRC. So the LRC has really produced. Give him a big hand. Ubabu Penuel Maduna said quite a mouthful, and I'm very happy that you were able to capture the mood. I'm happy that you were able to make sure that you give the basis on which we can listen to Judge Zondo. So I am not going to repeat some of the points that I felt would be apt for the introduction. Safe to say that we are looking forward to your presentation. I know you and I met, and I know that you were looking forward to this, so we really appreciate you spending time with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thandi, for those very kind words of introducing me. Indeed, I was looking forward to be here this evening. And thank you to Dr. Maduna also for the very kind words he said in his speech. I think that on a day when one is going to speak about such a remarkable man, it is quite good that one should have somebody such as Dr. Maduna say some of the words that need to be said about this man that I'm going to talk about this evening. First of all, I just wish to thank the Legal Resources Center for inviting me to speak this evening. I feel greatly honored and privileged that they have invited me and asked me to deliver this lecture in honor of such a distinguished South African. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that I should use this lecture not so much to speak in abstract, but to speak about concrete things that we may need to do if we want to honor and show appreciation for the kind of sacrifices that people such as Bram Fischer made for us in this country to enjoy the freedom that we enjoy. I thought that it would not be necessary to give an analysis of his life, because many people who are here would be very familiar with him and his life. I thought what would be important is for us to focus on what it is that we need to do if we want to make sure that this country is the kind of country that he would be proud of. I thought that we should talk about very concrete things that each and every one of us must do in order to make sure that his sacrifices and the sacrifices of many others are not in vain. As Dr. Maduna said, Bram Fischer came from a distinguished family. He could easily have lived a life of privilege, a life that did not bring him the kind of suffering that he was subjected to because of the choices that he made. When one thinks of the contribution that Bram Fischer made in the struggle for our liberation, one has got to go back to that South Africa in which he lived and look at the conditions that existed at that time. I'm happy that his daughters are here because they need to know that the majority of South Africans continue to appreciate the sacrifices that Bram Fischer and many others made, so that this evening I could stand before you as Deputy Chief Justice of this country. Because were it not for the struggles, the sacrifices, and the suffering of many, including Bram Fischer, there is no way I would have been Deputy Chief Justice of this country. I am because so many made sacrifices. Bram Fischer appreciated that there could be no peace in South Africa as long as the majority was denied fundamental rights. Indeed, he said, that the elimination of racial discrimination and the granting of all fundamental rights to everybody were his objective, were what he had lived and worked for nearly 30 years before the day he stood in the dock and read his statement. The majority of the people of South Africa during that time were subjected to repressive laws by a minority. They had no rights. They did not take part in the running of the country. They were told which parts of the country they could live in, and very often those parts of the country were far from the places of work. Very often it was places where the land was not arable. And all that was expected was that they should supply labor to white people. As the struggle for freedom intensified, the minority rule intensified repression. Many leaders were arrested and detained. But Bram Fischer was one of those who made the choice that he would suffer together with the majority. He made the choice that he could not enjoy privileges enjoyed by the few while the majority were suffering. In his statement from the dock, excuse me, he explains how at a very early age he had two African friends, other boys, that he played with, that he quarreled with, but says at no stage did he ever think that any fights that they might have had anything to do with the colors of their skins. This is how he puts it. Like many young Afrikaners, I grew up on a farm. Between the ages of 8 and 12, my daily companions were two young Africans of my own age. I can still remember their names. For 4 years, we were, when I was not at school, always in each other's company. We roamed the farm together. We hunted and played together. we modeled clay oxen and swam. And never can I remember that the color of our skins affected our fun or our quarrels or our close friendship in any way. When I read this passage about Bram Fischer and his two African friends at the age between 8 and 12, I'm reminded of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. In particular, I remember the part where Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that one day, there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers." Indeed, Bram and his African friends at the age between 8 and 12 seem to have related to one another as brothers. This is how Bram Fischer described part of his life as he grew up as a young boy on a farm. It is quite clear from this passage that the young Bram and his African friends related to one another simply as boys, irrespective of the color of their skins. It must be noted that this was not 1994. Indeed, it was not even 1980. It must have been around between 1916 and 1920. That at that stage in South Africa, an Afrikaner boy could have African boys as his friends with whom he played and had fun, says a lot about Bram Fischer's family background at that stage. Later in life, after Bram Fischer had finished school and had gone to university, he became a believer in segregation and thought that it provided a solution to South Africa's race problems. Indeed, he says in his statement from the dock that on one occasion he was introduced to leading members of the African community, and he found it hard to shake hands with them. He says he found that this required enormous effort of will on his part. This was at the time when he had received influence on segregation. Fortunately, later in his life, Bram Fischer became convinced that segregation was wrong and that the correct path was to build a society that would be based on human rights for all. Here is how he put it in his own words. I was a nationalist at the age of 6, if not before. I saw violence for the first time when, sitting on my father's shoulder, I saw business premises with German names bent to the ground in Bloemfontein, including some of my own family. I can still remember the weapons collected by my father and his friends who were bent on preventing a second outbreak. I saw my father leave with an ambulance unit to try and join the rebel forces. I remained a nationalist for over 20 years. Thereafter, and then he says, I never doubted that the policy of segregation was the only solution to this country's problems until the Hitler theory of race superiority began to threaten the world with genocide and with the greatest disaster in all history. The court will see that I did not shed my old beliefs with ease. It was when these doubts arose that one night, when I was driving an old ANC leader to his house, far out to the west of Johannesburg, that I propounded to him the well-worn theory that if you separate races, you diminish the points at which friction between them may occur, and hence ensure good relations. His answer was the essence of simplicity. If you place races of one country in two camps, said he, and cut off contact between them, those in each camp begin to forget that those in the other camp are ordinary human beings, that each lives and loves the same way, that each experiences joy or sorrow or pride or humiliation for the same reasons. Thereby, each becomes suspicious of the other and eventually fears the other, which is the basis of all racialism. And then he says, I believe no one could more effectively sum up the South African position today. In my view, when one looks at his journey, that is Bram Fischer's journey, from the time where he entertained the idea of segregation to the time when he changed, it shows that he was a person who was in search of a solution. And when an argument was presented to him, which was very persuasive, and he didn't have an answer for it, he changed and never looked back. Bram Fischer associated himself with the poor. He associated himself with the downtrodden. He associated himself with those who were not treated as citizens in their own country. Of course, he was a communist. And he explains in his speech from the dock 2 reasons which he believes moved him to join the Communist Party. And he says, "In my mind, there remain two clear reasons for my approach to the Communist Party. The one is the glaring injustice which exists and has existed for a long time in South African society. The other, a gradual realization as I became more and more deeply involved with the Congress movement of those years. That is the movement for freedom and equal human rights for all. That it was always members of the Communist Party who seemed prepared, regardless of cost, to sacrifice most, to give of their best, to face the greatest dangers in the struggle against poverty and discrimination." He continued and said, "But there could be no doubt of the existence of the willingness to sacrifice. By that time, the Communist Party had already, for 2 decades, stood avowedly and unconditionally for political rights, for non-whites, for blacks, and its white members were, save for a handful of courageous individuals, the only whites who showed complete disregard for the hatred which this attitude attracted from their fellow white South Africans. These members, I found, were whites who could have taken full advantage of all the privileges open to them and their families because of their color, who could have obtained lucrative employment and social position, but who instead were prepared, for the sake of their consciences, to perform the most menial and unpopular work at little or sometimes no remuneration. These were a body of whites who were not prepared to flourish on the deprivations suffered by others." He could have been speaking about himself, but he wasn't having himself in mind. He was talking about what impressed him, what made him join the Communist Party. He saw people that were concerned about the conditions of other people. He saw people that wanted to do something about the poverty that was faced by the majority of people. And he wanted to make a contribution for change to happen. He didn't want to be on the side of those who would flourish on the deprivations suffered by others. I said earlier on, I want to talk about practical things. The kind of sacrifice that Bram Fischer, or sacrifices that Bram Fischer made, are enormous. Because he was white, he would have made many black people of the time believe, because of him and other whites like him, that whatever the conditions were to which they were subjected, there was no basis to say all whites wanted that to happen. He would have been a beacon of hope to many black people that indeed there were white people who were on the side of justice, who were prepared to suffer together with them so that the whole system could change. The question that arises is, what are we as South Africans in 2019 prepared to sacrifice in order to make this country a better country? What are we prepared to do in order to change things for the better for the overwhelming majority of people? Millions of our people are poor. Millions have no homes. Millions have not been afforded quality education that can give them jobs. They have been given education, but it's not able to give them jobs. What are we prepared to do? We need to start thinking about practical things, things that I'm not going to wait for you to do before I do. Things that I can decide on my own I'm going to do, irrespective of whether somebody else does them, as long as I believe that it will contribute to the change that we need in this country. There is no doubt that Bram Fischer wanted for this country a society that has no discrimination, a society that is based on human rights. He wanted a society that would respect all human rights and give everybody human rights. Indeed, our Constitution makes it quite clear that we, as a people, have committed ourselves to establishing a society that is based on democratic values, on social justice, and on human rights. The preamble to our Constitution proclaims to the whole world that while recognizing the injustices of the past, and honoring those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, we adopted a constitution aimed at healing the divisions of the past and establishing a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Our preamble goes on to say that we seek to improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person. We seek to build a united and democratic South Africa, able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. That part of the preamble, that is to the effect that we seek to establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights, means that Whatever we do, both among ourselves as a people and with the outside world, we shall respect, observe, defend, protect, and promote human rights. This part of the preamble defines who we are, and all nations of the world are entitled to expect that wherever we go and whatever fora we may be at, we shall protect human rights. Given our history of colonialism, oppression, racism, and a denial of fundamental human rights, it is not surprising that we chose that post-apartheid we would be a society based on human rights. Dealing with the type of society that we as South Africans have chosen to be, the Constitutional Court had this to say a few years ago. The principle established in Mohammed has a direct connection with the provisions of Section 7(2), 10, 11, and 12 of the Constitution, and the values upon which our new constitutional democracy is based. When we first democratically elected Parliament, and Parliament adopted our Constitution, we as a nation turned our back on a very ugly past, which had caused untold suffering to many in our society. We committed ourselves to the building of a new society founded on the values of human dignity, the achievement of equality, and the advancement of human rights and freedoms, non-racialism, non-sexism, and the supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law. We sought to create a society whose cornerstone is our Bill of Rights, which enshrines the rights of all people in our country and affirms the democratic values of human dignity, equality, and freedom. One of the values of our Constitution on which our new society is based is the advancement of human rights. The effect of our commitment to a society based on, among others, this value is that as a nation, we have committed ourselves to advancing human rights in all that we do. It is therefore important that all of us, whether we are within the country or we are outside the country, and also whether we interact with other countries, that we remember that we have chosen that for better or for worse, are a society that is based on human rights, and that at all times we will act in order to advance human rights. That is not something that everybody will agree with, but that is in our Constitution. That is the choice we have made. And in my view, it is a choice to be proud of. In my view, it is a choice that Bram Fischer would be proud of. Indeed, if we stick to the advancement of human rights, this country will go quite far, because we will respect everyone's rights. We will respect everyone's human rights. The challenge is for us to identify as individuals, as groups, what I am going to do from tomorrow to reflect the legacy and the spirit of Bram Fischer. it is not good that we should just speak and we end there. We must adopt actions that will advance his legacy and therefore advance our society as well. Bram Fischer was an outstanding South African. We will never forget his contribution. He made huge sacrifices because he chose the side of the oppressed. Program Director, at this stage, please allow me to deal with two topics that have been on the minds and lips of our nation over the past few weeks. Those topics are the violence inflicted by men against women and children in our country, and the attacks on foreign nationals, and the looting of their businesses by some in our nation. I start with the violence against women and children. In the recent past, we have heard of very serious attacks on women and children by men. Each and every woman or child who has been attacked or sexually violated is important, but we cannot mention all of them. The brutal rape and murder of the UCT student Uyinene Mrwetyana, allegedly by a man employed by the post office, and the murder of baby Lee Yechels, allegedly by her romantic partner, and the murder of 4 children in Pinetown by their father, allegedly by their father who was going through a divorce with their mother, have gripped the nation, have gripped the attention of our nation. All members of our society should condemn these despicable acts by men against women and children. Violence by men against women and children is a very serious problem in our country. It has been a serious problem for many years. Soon after the attainment of our democracy, the first democratic parliament realized that this problem was so enormous that special legislative measures were necessary in order to try and curb it. The result was that Parliament passed the so-called minimum sentence legislation in 1998. That was the Criminal Law Amendment Act 105 of 1997. In terms of this legislation, the court's power to grant bail to persons accused of murder or rape under certain circumstances was significantly restricted, with the result that in those cases, a court may only grant bail under very limited circumstances. Furthermore, in terms of that legislation, the discretion that a court normally has to determine what the appropriate sentence is that should be imposed on an accused who has been found guilty of murder or rape was, in certain circumstances, severely restricted, with the result that the courts became obliged to impose a life sentence in such cases unless in the limited circumstances provided for in the law. This has been the position since about 20 years ago. For the past 20 years, our courts have been implementing the minimum sentence legislation. Excuse me. But it seems that these minimum sentences have not had the deterrent effect that it was thought they would have. It seems that no matter how harsh the sentences are that the courts impose on men found guilty of acts of murder and rape of women and children, the men are not deterred. It is as if these men have declared war on women and children and have vowed that nobody and no sentence will stop them. This is most regrettable. However, we cannot throw our hands in the air. We are forced to pause, reflect on the whole situation, and ask ourselves the question, what are we to do? While condemning this violence against women and children has its place, that cannot be all we do. We must also examine what it is that we have been doing over the past 20 years about this type of violence, which has not worked, because we cannot keep on doing the same things that we have been doing over the past 20 years in the same way about this violence, which have not worked, but hope that in that way we can defeat the scourge. If we keep on doing the same things in the same way, the violence against women and children will simply get worse and worse. It seems to me that one of the things that we men must do is to stop speaking about this scourge as if the men who perpetrate this violence are people from another planet or are people we do not live with or work with. We as men must all confess that as men, we have committed violence against women and children. We must confess that it is us men who rape women, who rape children, including our own children, who rape elderly women and women with disabilities. We must confess that it is us men who commit such despicable crimes, even as raping our own mothers. And it is us men who rape and strangle our partners. It is us men who do these things, and we must be ashamed of ourselves. In a speech I delivered last year on the subject of gender-based violence at a gala dinner hosted by the South African chapter of the International Association of Women Judges, I said, and I would like to repeat, I can hear the cries of women in the streets of Johannesburg. I can hear the cries of women in the streets of Soweto. I can hear the cries of women in Guamashu and Umlazi. I can hear the cries of women in Cape Town, in Gualanga, in Pretoria, in Bloemfontein, and all over the villages, the towns, and the cities of our land. I can hear the cries of women in all corners of our country saying to us men, senzeni na, madoda, senzeni na, ngabe isono sethu ubufazane na. What have we done wrong? Men, what have we done wrong? Is our sin our femininity? As I hear these cries of women, I ask the question to us men: How are we going to respond to those cries? How are we going to bring peace in the lives of women? What do we need to do to make sure that the tiny minority among us who give us such a bad name stop this violence against women and children? What are the extraordinary measures that we need to put in place in order to turn South Africa into a country where women and children are not subjected to this violence, where a woman can walk the streets of our cities, townships, suburbs, and villages at 12 midnight alone without the slightest fear that she will be attacked by men. We need to work with women and their organizations to identify the special measures that we need to take. The other issue that has been on our minds and on our lips has been the episode of attacks on foreign nationals. In the past 3 weeks, there have been many reports of such attacks in Johannesburg and other parts of our country. The visuals we have seen on our television screens have been visuals of people looting certain businesses. Almost all newspapers have also carried articles and pictures of looting. Unfortunately, this episode was not the first, nor was it the second. There have been a number of such attacks and looting, the first one having been in 2008. Whatever it is that the foreign nationals may be said to have done wrong cannot justify any physical attacks on them and the looting of their businesses, nor can it justify taking the law into your own hands. The tiny minority among us who may be responsible for that need to face the full might of the law. This is not to say that if foreign nationals have acted in breach of our laws, they should get away with it. No. Whether you are a South African citizen or you are a foreign national, you are subject to our laws, and our laws must be applied with no fear, favor, or prejudice. Taking the law into your own hands is unacceptable in any country that is based on the rule of law. The beating up of people, whoever they may be, is completely unacceptable. The looting of businesses is a shame on us as a nation. Whatever grievances people may have, violence and self-help have no place in our constitutional order. People from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, Nigeria, Lesotho, Ethiopia, DRC, Kenya, and all other countries on the continent are our brothers. They are our sisters, our sons, our daughters, our fathers, our mothers. We belong to the same continent. We are one. We share the same Mother Africa. We breathe the same air. Let us embrace them. If there are any disputes or issues, let us sit down and discuss those issues with them. And if no solution is found through this discussion, let us report those issues to relevant authorities. That is what people who live in a democracy do. That is what people who live in a country based on the rule of law do. That is what people who have adopted a constitution and have said in their constitution, we seek to build a society based on democratic values, social justice, and human rights, do. The beating up of people does not define us. We are not like that. We are a people who seek to establish a society that is caring, a society that respects other people's rights. And as I say that, I have absolutely no doubt that it is in line with what Bram Fischer would have said also if he were with us. With those words, I take this opportunity to thank you for listening. For me, it's been wonderful to be with you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Justice, for painting a stark picture of apartheid South Africa, and for your colourful description of a selfless and courageous man. Thank you also for your call to action for each one of us to contribute to a South Africa that Bram Fischer would be very proud of. We'd also like you to know that the LRC stands beside you in your condemnation of violence against women, children, and foreign nationals. I'd like to ask Mr. Nursing Govender, the National Director of the LRC, to present you with a token of our appreciation. I'd now like to call upon Ms. Lumka Mlambo, one of the LRT trustees, to give a vote of thanks.
Hi. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I'd just like to start off by giving thanks to Ilse and Ruth, the daughters of Bram Fischer, for allowing this opportunity to celebrate the life and legacy of what was truly an outstanding man. And then, obviously, we'd like to extend our thanks to the Chief Justice for delivering an excellent lecture that reminds us of the history from which we come from. My key takeaways was about the fact that we all have a choice as to the person we want to become. The choices we make define the character that the world sees. And it's important to keep making those choices to further entrench the democracy and the values enshrined in our constitution in South Africa, so that no woman in South Africa or no child has to ask themselves, am I next? No foreigner walks around not feeling like an African or a brother in this country. And then, once again, I'd like to thank Bowman's, the chairman, Ezra, for allowing us to present this opportunity to you guys and her hosting it at this facility. And then to the SABC team, thank you so much for providing coverage for this excellent and auspicious occasion. To the donors of the LRC that keep funding, keep this business supported to allow us to keep doing this important work that we do as the LRC. And then to everybody else who's made it here and taken the time to come and share this evening with us, we thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lumka. Quoting President Mandela once again, he said, I'm confident that there will be Bram Fischer Memorial Lectures for as long as South Africans yearn for freedom in a non-racial, democratic South Africa. And I think that continues to be the case. The Deputy Chief Justice spoke of the role that each one of us plays in making this a South Africa that Bram Fischer and others would be proud of. What are we prepared to sacrifice? And what is each one of us going to do from tomorrow? As we leave here this evening, may we all plant and nurture those seedlings. We appreciate your attendance, and for those of you driving this evening, please do not forget to get your tickets validated or you will not be able to leave. Thank you very much and have a great evening. Could I ask us to let the Chief Justice leave the room before we depart? Thank you.